Hello and welcome to the Hunter Bond podcast, where I get an opportunity to speak to the key players and leaders within the world of finance, technology, and recruitment. I'm very pleased today to be joined by Liam Holohan. So Liam has a wealth of experience in technology and leadership roles within both the financial services and health tech industries. Liam has a PhD in physics from Imperial College and is currently the CTO of DSST. DSST has produced a multi-user platform called Noink, which allows patients to generate and control their own health data. So thank you so much for joining me today, Liam.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
No worries. How are you doing? You okay?
Not too bad. Enjoying the sunshine. Yeah, I'd just like to say thanks again for having us. And I hope that, as you can tell by my vintage, I would say that I have some experience or lessons learned and hopefully some advice to people that are thinking of a career in IT or thinking of moving industries within IT or trying to make a change.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, the transition I think you've made from banking and financial services into health tech, and I guess the differences in that will be really interesting. I like to say a wealth of experience rather than you being in the industry a long time. But of course, you've gone through multiple recessions. We've had the whole COVID situation, which I'm sure has massively impacted the health tech sector. So it'd be really interesting to get your thoughts on them changes and whatnot. But of course, someone like yourself who obviously comes from an engineering background and has maybe moved into more leadership roles, I think a lot of people can get a lot of value of maybe some of the experiences and trapdoors that maybe you could hopefully give them a bit of insight to if they are ever thinking about either making that transition into technology or into more leadership positions. But it'd be great for the people, I guess, to get to know your background a little bit more for anyone who doesn't know Liam. So I guess starting with your physics PhD and your transition into technology, how did that all come about?
Yes. It was because of a car. In reality, no, I would say I've always been in science and engineering, and formally I am a physicist. On that note, I would say that I would always recommend people if they want to study something, you can't do better than STEM subjects. I would always say, right, do STEM subjects. It keeps your options open. It gives you that analytical and logical thinking, which will only benefit you probably in whatever industry or career you want to end up in.
Right.
Yes. So I studied physics. It was actually astronomy and astrophysics, and in Imperial in London. And like a lot of probably graduates, I bought a car and had to pay for said car. So to pay for the car, you have to get a job. And I was lucky enough to get a job in a large financial institution in Deutsche Bank in the late 90s. So that is how I got into banking. The advantages of doing a STEM subject was that you have the analytical skills, and as long, I would say, where your first job starts, if you are hardworking, curious, and willing to learn, I think your undergraduate degree is not as important as some people may think.
Okay.
It's I would say technology is a bit of a meritocracy, and again, if you have the analytical skills, you can flourish, irrespective of what you may have studied. I would caveat that saying that any sort of STEM subject at university gives you a huge advantage. So working with Deutsche Bank, it was a trial by fire, I would say. It was, young graduates being exposed to real world problems, real world systems at very early on in your career. And the one thing I would say that a banking career has given is an appreciation of the scale of some systems.
Yeah.
That at the time, this is before social media or Google had really taken off, or the Facebooks of the world. So banking systems were probably outside of government, they were probably the biggest systems you could ever work on. Right. Today, it's probably social media or the Googles of the world that would have systems of a similar scale. Working on that sort of scale of systems gives you an appreciation of global nature of business. It gives you an appreciation of working in global teams. I know remote working is the way of the world right now, but on large systems, that was, conference calls and pre-Slack days, that was the norm in banking, just because of the size of some of these systems. And you have an appreciation for not just application development, but the sort of the non-functional requirements of systems. Is it performant? Is it stable? Is it, is it cost efficient? And how do you support it? How do you support a system that in effect is never off? And that, again, with social media, that would be a similar use case. That would be, it's 24-hour support models, follow the sun, and that gives you exposure to working with people from all areas of the world.
Brilliant. And so looking at your journey, I think so you got to a point at Deutsche Bank where you was heading up the sort of loans or the IT infrastructure within the loan sector. You then moved into a sort of tech solution role, which is more to do with sort of production management and whatnot as well.
Yes, yes.
And then more into the RPL testing, head of testing sector. What was that journey like? And I guess what was the different roles? And
I think I won't say I was like Forrest Gump for being in the right place at the right time. It was very interesting in that in a sort of the turn of the century, the web was making big inroads into the banking sector, and so there was a huge move away from what was traditionally thick clients, two-tier architecture, to moving stuff to onto a web-based platform. Those web-based platforms were hosted in-house in data centers. So I was lucky in that I've been there since the birth of, we'll say, web-based technologies in business scenarios. The moving to loans was quite interesting in that it was around the time of the credit crunch. So you can imagine loans were quite topical.
Yeah.
That gave me an appreciation for capacity and volume in systems. So you can imagine around the time of the credit crisis, there was a huge amount of trading activity, people trying to close out positions, et cetera, et cetera. So it really brought the discipline of capacity management into focus for me. It was huge volumes, and things like you needed to have the lessons learned at the time. And again, this is pre-cloud. Was you had to have your capacity had to be at least 3 times your busiest day. So this was a term known as 3x capacity. To do that, you couldn't predict when it was going to occur. You didn't have the facilities in cloud now to immediately spin up new resources. So it was a capital investment in your infrastructure. So on a normal day, you were running at 1/3 capacity, and that was a cost you had to bear. And that led to certain things after, we'll say, the financial crash that gave an impetus to the banks to leverage outsourcing and services by technology vendors, and that led to software as a service being accepted within banking, and that it also led to, I would say, the birth of fintech and London being a powerhouse of fintech because of that.
And would you say banking was one of the first sort of institutions or industries to sort of take that on board, the outsourcing, the SaaS as a service solution, and other businesses followed, or was banking kind of ahead of its time in that aspect?
I would say it was ahead of its time. I mean, technology in banking is a pretty ruthless business insofar as very pragmatic. If it doesn't work, it doesn't live. So and if it costs too much, it doesn't live. So I would say the financial crisis, and like all crises in general, they tend to spur on invention as opposed to innovation. So if you could picture the scenario of the banking crisis, a lot of banks were under, Royal Bank of Scotland, Lloyds, etc., subsequently had received some government money, but they had in around the 2008-9 era, they had, if I wind back slightly, they had 10-15 years of what's known as a bull market. So revenue was king, and costs was a secondary consideration. So with the financial crisis, cost consciousness became very, very important. Not just for the bank's bottom line, but they obviously had a responsibility to the government to pay back their funding, their capital. So cost conscious, to get extreme efficiency, some how would you say, some sacred cows of the IT world were sacrificed. And that was, you do not have to build everything yourself. You can buy, you can integrate, and software as a service does reduce your capital spend a lot. So the equivalent of that would be, I would say, as I mentioned, you usually had to have a server idling, and that was on your balance sheet, and that server lived for 3, 4, 5 years. So that cost, it was depreciation, that cost was on your balance sheet all the time. With software as a service, it's a pay-as-you-go model, give or take. So you don't have that huge capital expenditure that on your balance sheet.
What you need, it's more so than
pay as you go, as you need, and it also it's almost like the rule of experts. So the banks realized that the name of their organization was bank and not IT, and
leave it to the experts to deal with it.
Exactly, and a lot of skills had been built up in the banking world, in the IT sector, and a lot of the senior people in those organizations left or were made redundant or moved, and took that knowledge, that expertise, and built systems for their previous employer and for other banks as a service. And banking were very accepting of outsourcing non-core services. And IT, however much we like to think of it, it is not core to a bank's balance sheet. It's a cost. So it allows them to do great business, and it allows them to enter new markets. But fundamentally, it is a cost it's not a profit center.
Did you find that the quality was reduced when the costs were reduced, or was it that now we're actually outsourcing to specialists and experts, the quality was just as good, but the costs have just been reduced? Was it an easy choice for banks, or did they have to make sacrifices by trying to reduce their costs?
There were there's trade-offs. Yeah. And before we get into those particular trade-offs, banks had already grappled with those trade-offs in the outsourcing of the early part of the century of IT support, and probably so the offshoring to, as we'll say, moving further east with their to reduce their cost base. So banks already had an appreciation for the trade-offs you get with outsourcing certain things. Yeah. You do lose an element of control, which some banks. It also depended on the culture of the bank, but you do. I would say after initial teething problems, a lot of the software as a service has actually been a big improvement for banks, in that it allowed the culture of a bank to have no place in software delivery. Right. So if you are a software developer inside a bank, you're part of that bank's culture, and one of the rules of software delivery is the software delivery reflects the organization. So if you're a dysfunctional organization, you will probably have dysfunctional software, or software with some idiosyncrasies. In a software as a service model, you have more than one client. Right. So you are doing the best software for an industry, or for you're thinking about bigger pictures. And I would say, despite teething problems and maybe some financial institutions lamenting a loss of control, I think they are the better for it. Yeah. And they are getting a more efficient. It's a more efficient service for them. So it's leaner on their balance sheet.
It's probably more simple as well if they find they are using a particular business for that service. If they aren't getting the quality or the service that they need, that I'm sure there's other competitors or other people they can go to.
It's a competitive market.
Rather than having to re-look at everything internally and make a big transformation internally, they can maybe just switch to another solution potentially.
Exactly. If there's competition in that market, there'll be multiple vendors that can provide a platform to multiple clients. So you might have an element of vendor lock-in, but it's not the same as internal cultural change, which is far more difficult to do than switching vendors.
Competition always breeds improved service and quality as well. You have to be better than the person next to you or your competition, whereas I think internally you can be quite stuck in, that you haven't necessarily got competition as such. You have to provide the best possible solution.
Internal IT departments do have a monopoly, yes.
Yeah. So talking about, going back to, I know you was talking about, big systems within banking, and we were talking about transformation, and you've obviously, you'd probably seen a big period of transformation. You mentioned about cloud and whatnot, and I think there's a stigma as well with things like legacy code within banking, where you're still having to work on very old systems and whatnot. How, in terms of transformation, how did that work within banking? Was it
yeah, again, I mean, in hindsight, it was certain things are fortunate and certain things aren't. A lot of companies with the current pandemic is the crisis du jour. It's banking had one 10 years ago, so that's why they get a leg up on certain things. Banking around the time of the financial crisis, it made a decision to outsource or to use software as a service or to use service providers rather than build everything in-house. To do that transformation was painful. There's no doubt about it. It was painful, it was costly, and now they are leaner organizations because of it. To move, we'll say, big systems from internally hosted on-prem, as we say, to the cloud. You can't just lift, your there's no polite way of saying it, your bad systems and drop them and make it someone else's problem. I mean, you could, but it's not cost benefit. There's no benefit there to cost. You'll be charged a stupidity tax. So there was a lot of transformation that had to occur to make banks to let banks really leverage software as a service and infrastructure as a service and hosting as a service. So to get there, a lot of things had to be decommissioned, and and that's what transformation work is. It's not when you transform an organization and you say we've moved 20 systems from internal to some cloud provider. That's great, but the metric I look for is how many systems have you decommissioned in that move. So it's not just lift and shift; it's lift, clean, and shift. And banks struggled with, well, they had to grapple that thorny issue 10 years ago. So that is why a lot of mainframes were quietly strangled around the time of the London Olympics. Other industries probably haven't had that. So I would hazard a guess that mainframes are still in organizations that haven't fully adopted, we'll say, software infrastructure as a service. So perhaps people will tell me I'm completely wrong, but I would say insurance, asset management may probably have a lot of mainframes kicking around and the risks associated with them.
So I think, I've had, when we look at something like technical debt, for instance, I can imagine, especially in a lot with large systems, big banking, lots of different systems, technical debt could just get built up. And then you get to a point where we suddenly need to make this transformation. And as you say, you're having to, I guess, basically greenfield everything, decommission a lot of these systems and platforms. Is that because of a lot of the bad coding and the technical debt you've kind of left behind, or?
Yes, yeah. I mean, technical debt it's something everyone should strive to get rid of. It is the past. It's past Liam's mistakes. So past Liam was lazy. Past Liam was under pressure. Past Liam had deliverables.
Yeah. And
so you take the path of least resistance, and that becomes technical debt. And technical debts, I mean, what's call it obsolescence as well. It's cumulative. So we would say everything will seem okay right up until it isn't. So you can live with technical debt until it comes back and decides that's enough. I think it was Hemingway that said, "How did you go bankrupt? Two ways: very slowly, and then all of a sudden." And that's technical debt. It's
like filling a water balloon up, isn't it? Eventually, the water
eventually
balloon's just
something's got to give. You hit a tipping point, and technical debt, that it's a reflection of the compromises you had to make in your systems in the past. Going back to software as a service, by going down the software as a service route, you are putting that technical debt risk on someone else. But it's to remove technical debt it's usually transformations. It's transformation work, and in the coding of systems, try to what we say from the computer science world, you'd say you do abstraction, you build platforms, you don't build hard-coded systems. And what we say is it's a nebulous term, but you try and future-proof it. And when people say future-proofing, what they're talking is they're abstracting interfaces. There are things like APIs and what we hear a lot about today. That mitigates technical debt.
Yeah, and it helps with scalability and all sorts later on down the line.
Absolutely.
So what do you think other industries, or if there's other leaders here, watching the podcast today, what could they learn from the banking industry after, say, the recession or these sort of transformations? Is there anything they should be keeping in mind, or they should be doing today rather than?
I think there's lots of don't look back in anger, but there's lots of things. I'm a firm believer in. No one has a monopoly on genius, or no one has a monopoly on revolution. I'm a firm believer in looking at other industries and see how most problems have been solved in some way already.
Yeah.
So we'll say any industry now, be it insurance, be it asset management, they're probably grappling with problems or business problems that have been faced by other industries in the past. When we say banking, I'm particularly talking about investment banking or the capital markets, which tend to be more leading edge and more accepting of new technologies. So and stand on the shoulders of giants, learn from their mistakes, find out what worked, take their learnings and smile and say thank you.
Yeah, take advantage of it.
Exactly. Stand on the shoulders of giants or avoid their carcasses. I would say the industries would investment banking in particular, I would say cloud and software as a service has worked. There have probably been terrible mistakes, but if there are terrible mistakes, they've been well publicized. So if you're in another industry and you're committed, the business imperative is to reduce costs, or there's a valid business reason to adopt some technology, I would say look at how that technology has evolved in other industries. It's a second mover advantage. Yeah. So Facebook wasn't the first, Amazon wasn't the first. They had second mover advantage. They didn't do the mistakes of the pioneers of these industries.
And you've worked in banking, you've also worked in startups. For anyone who manages startups, talking about things like software as a service and outsourcing solutions, is that an option for startups in a way, or what should they kind of be taking into consideration if they are looking at doing something like that?
Software as a service, because it's a sort of a pay-as-you-go model, you can bootstrap quite quickly. So the startups of 10, 15 years ago had to invest in infrastructure. They had to buy servers. They had to commit to buying servers usually for years. So their capital outlay was quite steep. Those barriers to entry have in effect been eliminated. Wow. So startups can leverage what is in effect a global, the skills and technology of large companies like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, and they're building products that if you had to, you are buying those products. You don't have to build that. So the question I would always say to startups is know when to build, know when to buy, and know when to integrate. And the advantage today of a lot of this cloud infrastructure and software as a service is there's lots of stuff you do not have to build. Yeah. And concentrate on your business and solving particular problems and needs. Yeah. You don't have to concentrate on building up a large infrastructure estate.
Yeah, especially, prioritizing then man hours is vitally important, isn't it? If you can prioritize your time and outsource the other stuff you don't necessarily need to focus on, I think that will really benefit startups, not only in cost but also in time management and actually being able to get the product out to market.
And it will allow them to pivot. It's I would say cloud infrastructure and services like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft Azure, it gives you the luxury of throwing away mistakes quickly. So you don't have technical debt, or technical debt is not as costly because of these software as a service.
Yeah. Okay. So that sounds. Yeah. I think that a lot of people can take a lot from that for sure. Looking at on your, I wanted to find out as well a little bit more about cybersecurity within
Sure.
banking, because I can imagine. I mean, we haven't quite touched on regulations and whatnot as well,
Yeah.
and how that really impacts technology. And I can imagine with the advancement of, you know, hacking technology,
Yeah.
cybersecurity has had to keep up, or at least, you know, be a couple of steps ahead of it. Is that something you've kind of been involved with at all, or?
Yeah, my advice for people around security in general is a healthy dose of paranoia is always good. You have to, and it's probably counterintuitive or it's unpleasant, but you have the people who are good at cybersecurity. They do not think the best of people. You have to think the worst of people, and so you need a healthy dose of paranoia, and the cybersecurity, I mean, coming from the financial industry, and I think this was probably standard practice. So employees that were engaged in the security side, be it network security or the audit side, they were completely walled away from other members of the organization. So there was, in banking, it's known as, on the business side, it's known as Chinese walls. It's a block in information flow. In the IT side, similar things occur. So it's the concept of, you know, least knowledge. So security and network security professionals and cybersecurity professionals in an organization tend to be their own little, I won't say fiefdom, but they're separated away, and communication is minimized because of that. And that is because, you know, it's good practice. You need to know basis. Separation of duties is what these things are called. Not to worry anyone thinking of engaging in building platforms, but I would say cloud providers, this is one of their core offerings, or this is what they worry about as well. I'm saying, so even
it's their responsibility to worry about.
Their responsibility. So if you kick it hard enough, a cloud provider's data center has, you know, it's got ISO accreditation for physical security. It would provide tools to do network security. It would provide monitoring. So to protect yourself as a company in the old pre-cloud days was physical security, network security, relentless monitoring, and separation of duties, and the concept of need to know.
Yeah.
All those are critical for software as a service delivery, and cloud providers do provide certain tools to do that. Not all of them, or it's a build, buy, or integrate, but they do actually provide a lot of these tools. And the sort of the acid test of this for cloud providers is they have government clients, they have military clients. You don't have to, you get a very good base level of security, but if you keep a healthy dose of paranoia, you will be able to mitigate or anticipate certain things.
So you do hear about, obviously, data leaks and whatnot, often in the news, whether it be e-commerce or credit card data and whatnot. Is that? I mean, it's hard to say exactly because we don't know exactly the infrastructure, but a lot of the time, is that them? Is it the data centers? Is it the software as a service third-party solutions that have been hacked, or is it the company's responsibility as cybersecurity? Or
it's probably an element of all. It's a mixture of both, but it is, I would say, data security is the responsibility of the person, the person who's collecting the data. So if you may be using a cloud, provider to provide you with a database, but your system is putting the data in.
Yeah.
And it's your responsibility.
You're the one who chose that service and whatnot.
And you built the software hooks for people to input data. A lot of it is, I would say, you can have the best lock in the world, but if you're leaving your key under the doormat, under the mat in front of it, so it defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
So as they say in security, I mean, it's as strong as its weakest link, and unfortunately, most of the weakest links are people, processes, it's it's a multifaceted problem, and eternal vigilance and paranoia but it's usually they break. If you have a platform and there's a leak, it breaks, and then you fix that problem, you do a root cause analysis, and you make sure that never happens again. That's plugged that leak. There will be another leak, and these things will always occur. So there's certain things you must do around security just to mitigate, and learning from the mistakes from others. So data leaks, that's a failure of the network it's a failure of intrusion detection. And even if they get the data, if you haven't encrypted it, that's a failure. So it's multifaceted.
Yeah.
But I would say in general, ultimately it is you, the startup, or you, the organization, that may be using these software providers, but ultimately it's your responsibility not to be leaving keys in the front of the door.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, good advice. So after Deutsche Bank as well, you moved into the world of blockchain, which I think is a bit of a buzzword at the moment. I think there's been a lot of interest in the last sort of 6 months or so in terms of blockchain and crypto and things like that as well.
Yeah, I was lucky again in that in my undergraduate I did physics with computers, and this was so to level set, blockchain is the application of old mathematics so if you kick blockchain hard enough, the maths is from the 60s and 70s. We call it public key or cryptographic keys. That's what blockchain is based on. What has happened to bring it to the fore now has been a cloud, i.e. a lot of compute and storage
power, isn't it?
Cheap compute power has allowed these things to be created. So blockchain could have been done in the 80s, could have been done in the 80s and the 90s. It would have been phenomenally expensive.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about electricity,
now.
but it would have been phenomenal, just the amount of compute power needed.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, that's similar with AI as well. A lot of the AI techniques that we hear about today, it's not so much a revolution in the underlying algorithms or the underlying mathematics. It's the availability of cloud, of cheap compute and storage. But yeah, so blockchain, I saw it. It's my take on blockchain is we don't know what its killer app will be right now. And in general, I think
What do you mean by that? Sorry.
I mean the real killer solution that blockchain will fit, I don't think has been found. Right.
Okay.
In general, with software, we tend to overestimate its benefits in the short term and underestimate its benefits in the long term.
Right. Once we figure that out, then the value of it is just gonna.
So blockchain right now, it's solving niche problems, or it's solving particular around distributed ledgers. It's around trust, around data fragmentation, and it's going to bump up against government legislation because it's the concepts around trustless systems is a bit subversive for the nation state, and hence, so the use of a currency is the first application, and I think it will drive innovation, and it will be it is a valid currency. I think around data fragmentation, it has a lot of work a lot of benefits it can do. So that's the problem of if everyone has to maintain copies of stuff and they don't trust each other, that leads to a lot of data fragmentation. And data fragmentation has been in banking, and it's been in most industries since there was data. If there's immutable copies, it allows you to trust a particular set of data, and that can reduce a lot of data fragmentation, which gives a cost saving. And words like cost saving, it pricks the ears of banking.
Yeah, financial services. Really.
On blockchain, I think it's very interesting. it has proven itself in applications in finance, but I think the real application of blockchain, I don't think we've seen it yet. And that's probably a level of me being stupid, but I don't think we've seen the killer app for a blockchain application. I mean, the reason I say that is the killer app for mobile phones was not making calls; it was text. No one thought, and text was thrown in as an afterthought, and that because texting was a known quantity, known price, that allowed the teenagers of 20 years ago to have a mobile phone and use functionality. So just as I think texting was what really helped mobile phone adoption, I don't know what the app that will give blockchain global adoption right now. Interesting
to see where it goes. So your role as a delivery lead there, what exactly was you doing in your position?
It was difficult in that it was in FX. So FX is foreign exchange, and it is the big boy of finance. It is for technology. It is the very high volume, very resource intensive IT, and because of that, it is highly automated in the industry. So whereas you used to have guys on phones 20 years ago buying and selling currency, it's now essentially it's straight through processing. It's completely algorithmic, and that was the most difficult part of IT. It was low latency, huge volumes with a lot of regulatory reporting and positions and heavy maths out the back end.
It needs to be real time, as you say. The low latency is so important about.
And what I was doing there for delivery lead was try to apply blockchain to that. Now, blockchain, if any of your listeners or your viewers would know, it's not known for its speed.
Right.
And so we went for the hardest one to see how it could help the foreign exchange trade life cycle. And so, yes, there was some successes and some. So what happens there is it brings out. Blockchain, because of its fundamental architecture, it will never replace low latency systems. Right now, a fool tries to predict what's going to happen in 10 years' time. But but it was used as in certain parts of the trade processing life cycle, and it really stressed. We were trying to stress the ability to do things at speed on a blockchain.
Interesting.
And it was successful, but it's proprietary, and I can't really talk about the. But the answer to that was blockchain. Right now, its detractors will say it's slow, it's clunky, it's the worst place to store data, and I would say that let's try.
Many people said the internet would never take off in the 90s.
Yeah. I mean, IBM said the world has needs for 3 computers. Bill Gates said, was it 64K of memory should be enough for anyone. So we should never, when trying to predict what's going to happen, I say don't try and predict after 5 years, anything's up.
Yeah, it's crazy. So that's great. So I wanted to touch on your, I guess, transformation from banking then and blockchain into the healthcare sector. So as I mentioned, at the moment you're the CTO of DSST. So you've got this Noink platform. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that is?
Sure. So typically in healthcare, the reason people get into it is probably because of personal circumstances. So that's normally, and they always say you should tell a story to engage viewers, but with healthcare, it's usually tales of woe. So, but what we'll say is it was serving, I got into healthcare to serve a particular need I found lacking with a close friend and some family members, etc. But what I saw was, from my career, I had the privilege or the advantage of working on cutting edge stuff that's applied to business. And I looked at healthcare, and if there's any healthcare, if any of your listeners are working in healthcare, please don't take this the wrong way, but it was like looking into the past. It was, you were looking at systems that were, it was like looking back, turn of the century type stuff.
Wow.
I would say, I mean, that's a harsh statement to say.
Maybe not far off though.
But I saw lots of improvements that could be made. If I wind back slightly, I would say the imperative I see is the big macroeconomic trends is, and this has been brought into focus with the pandemic, is that universal healthcare, in this country it's called the NHS, in Ireland it's called the HSE, in certain other countries we call it something else. It's not sustainable in its current form with an aging population. Wow. And that's a doomsayer's prediction. But yeah, and I a few minutes ago I said don't predict it over 5 years. I'm talking about on a 20-year time.
Now the NHS is collapsing. Yeah.
I'm breaking my own rules. And the reason I say that is the NHS has been a godsend, and it showed the best of the country in the pandemic. Yeah. But it is under enormous pressure. And it's under enormous pressure right now. And in 20 years' time, there will be a lot more old people. People my age will break the NHS because we'll be retired. And so to fix that, or to fix that, or the goal would be to have the same level or better of service or of care that you have today for all future generations, irrespective of the demographics of the population. Right now, the UK and most of the developed world are looking down the barrel of aging population, reduced tax base, and health systems that are under pressure and are even more.
You think it will just be stressed due to the extra numbers of elderly?
Yeah. So what will happen is, I shouldn't say the word will. In 20 years' time, there will be about 3 million more retired pensioners than there is today, and there will be less working age people in the UK on the current trends. So the NHS will have to deliver to more people. We're talking maybe 10% more people.
Wow.
With less tax base to fund it. So that is not even considering the backlog of care with the pandemic. So I believe that to get there, to be able to make the NHS sustainable, unfortunately there's two things you can do. One is increase the tax base, which certain sections of the economy would not agree with, and certain sections would.
Government's not afraid to do that, so.
But to do it would be a huge tax increase, or you get extreme efficiency, and extreme efficiency can be done with technology. And I think the pandemic has shown what technology can do in healthcare. So, who would have thought you'd be talking to your doctor on a mobile phone? Who'd have thought that 2 or 3 years ago? Who'd have thought you would book appointments or things like that? So the pandemic, while terrible, and it is leaving the NHS in a very bad state, on the more optimistic side, it has shown the clinicians and healthcare providers what is possible with technology. And I think I would lament if it went back to the old ways of doing things. I would say that the NHS will be much more efficient with technology. It should be funded to invest in technology, and the face-to-face care with your GP should be need-based, not condition-based.
If we stressed that before, didn't we? I think that was always the case. But yeah, because of I guess not necessarily the fear or going out into the world and whatnot. I think I've had calls with doctors over the phone, which I never had before, and physicals, obviously not full physicals, more just like, do you drink, do you smoke kind of conversations, which you normally have to go into the surgery to do. But why do you think, I know you said this, why do you think it's been so hard before COVID for the NHS to embrace or take technology on board to help it work more efficient?
There was I would say the NHS leaders and the Department of Health know this. They know it's not. I'm not giving any revolutionary insights here. This is known. It's how do you change the culture of such a large organization to embrace technology? And it has taken a crisis to focus minds. on the use of technology. And I can see the reasons why. I can see the reasons why you don't want to embrace radical change. We said banking is quite ruthless, and that if it doesn't work, it dies quickly. That is not a mentality you should have in healthcare. In healthcare, it's do no harm, and that leads to gradual change is good, which eventually leads
trial and error doesn't work so well.
Trial and error doesn't work. So gradual change is good in healthcare, but when it becomes no change is the status quo, that's bad. So I think what COVID has done is it has accelerated relevant, appropriate technology in the NHS without compromising patient care. And that's the difficult thing. You have to increase technology to get efficiency gains, but you cannot compromise patient care. And so that is why gradual change is good. Gradual change doesn't, it has a place, and it is to save lives, but it can't be so gradual that it is putting lives at risk. And that's a funny, there's a flip side to this, because they say gradual change is good, do no harm in healthcare. And in technology, we'll say move fast and break stuff. There's always going to be that tension. So what you need to do is technologists have to realize that moving fast and breaking stuff doesn't work in healthcare. And healthcare has to realize that it's not just clinicians that are now instrumental in delivering it.
Yeah.
Technologists are now part of the solution, whereas before, probably seen as part of the problem. And it would be very interesting to see. I mean, as we say, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And I think this will give the NHS in particular the ability to get on a sustainable path through technological efficiencies.
Well, you look at something like the vaccines, which were, went through research and trials, and then out there within 2 years. When I think if you look at stereotypically, vaccines take up to a decade sometimes to get approved and go through.
Yeah,
research.
I mean, it showed science. Okay, so the vaccine, the vaccine was SARS, not COVID. SARS helped a little bit, but the vaccine rollout showed clinical science at its best, and delivery of it.
Do you think that was just more hands on deck? Sort of more resource towards it, or sped the process along, or do you think it was more, there's a real need for us to get this out, so let's just try and get it done as quickly as possible?
I would say more hands on deck, more investment was thrown at promising things. It wasn't created from a standing start. We said there were certain products that were. It was not invention; it was innovation. And the thing was, it was probably political barriers were removed, but clinical trials or clinical safety was not compromised. And it showed that healthcare can move fast without breaking things, and it's now up to technology to show they can move. They know we can move fast.
Yeah, that's exactly.
I think
there's a lot that you can kind of take from that. But is it a case that NHS or need to invest more money and more people and more hands on deck to technology to help continue that growth, or do you think now coming out of the crisis that we're going to kind of maybe come back into this more sort of gradual approach again?
I think the NHS post crisis they need a breather. I think
everyone
they need to
go holiday for a couple of weeks. Yeah.
What works and what doesn't work. I mean, so the processes that manage to scale up. So I mean, it wasn't. Vaccinations have been around for a long time. So the NHS does have capability in vaccinating with flu every year. So the interesting thing is what technology helped to scale all processes that existed already in flu vaccination to scale to doing an entire population in, let's call it 9 months. Yeah. So and that was it a highly manual process? Was it a technical process? What technology helped? What technology didn't? I would say there's probably elements of both.
Yeah.
I would say mobile app to book your vaccination probably was a huge benefit. So, and then I would say that, and if I was an NHS leader, I would say, right, mobile lets us reach the entire population.
I'm 29. I got my first invite for a vaccine in May when it wasn't even the 20 to 30s, and it was done by text, just quickly through the website, booked my time, done, in and out. Got a text 4 or 5 weeks later, here's your second jab, and it's now, we're recording this on the 24th of June, and I mean, I've had both my jabs like in the last few weeks, so it's been really efficient.
That's technology at its best. I mean, last year or 2 years ago, let's assume let's add 40 years to you. You would have got a letter saying your flu jab. Go to your doctor. You would go to your doctor. You would wait in the surgery. You would get your jab. There's an hour, 2 hours of your day gone. You would go home, and if there was a booster shot, you would get a letter. At some stage, you might read it, you might not. So I mean, so there's been a lot of process improvement or process automation, and I think that the NHS could benefit a lot from that type of stuff. Easy processes, reaching your patient via text, and there was no hands were used in that process at all. It was what we call in banking, that was straight through processing.
Yeah. And I think as well, I think a big issue is people not cancelling GP appointments and stuff. And you always see the stats when you go to your GP about, and I think the ability of people to maybe just do that easily over a text now, rather than having to call in and whatnot and wait 30 minutes to get through to someone. I think all of these processes, if it can be streamlined, will just improve the efficiency of everything overall. Well, that's really interesting. So someone like yourself then, who I guess, if you said sort of 10 years ago, technology in NHS or health tech wasn't maybe the most attractive for an engineer or technologist to kind of get into, but what would you say now about health tech and med tech in terms of people maybe looking to do an engineering or a technologist type role within this industry? Is it really worth it?
I think it's an exciting time for health tech, health tech in general. It spans from the heavy research clinician work, which is another word for saying machine learning. So AI, machine learning, pattern matching, for disease discovery. That's real world. That's papers, and that's Lancet papers. That's medical. That is improving population health really where it matters. That's discovery of things like penicillin class work, and that technologists would have that is in the machine learning side, right down to mobile developers or UX designers to make the interaction of the population to their health service more streamlined and more efficient. And of course then, and in between both, for the paranoid among our listeners, the NHS would exceed banking level requirements for security, for cybersecurity. So if my bank balance got out in the public, fine. But if my blood results got out, it's a huge there's a deep well of cybersecurity and information security paranoid people required, it's a multifaceted.
We spoke about software as a service within banking. Does the NHS do that kind of thing as well? Are they outsourcing a lot of things, or does it have to be in-house? Is that something they could do more of?
There is software as a service, and I'll sort of explain how it works slightly. They do use government data centers. They do use certain data centers. They partner with the likes of Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. They do have a lot of network security. So there is outsourcing of service providing, because it's called the National Health Service. It's not called the National IT Service. So I was like, banks are banks, not IT, not tech organizations. Health service is health. Please let them concentrate on delivering care. So there is outsourcing. There is software as a service. What I've seen a lot more of is APIs. Lots of APIs are coming on stream for health, and it's not. There is a lot of standards in banking and a lot of open standards. The similar do exist in health data. So there's every disease you can possibly have has a classification code that's internationally accepted, and more importantly and moreover, it's applied, and it is systems can can talk to each other. So
Right.
there's moves for APIs for interoperability. So yeah, in the past, healthcare was very siloed.
Yeah, that's what I
And
thought it
I
might
can
be.
see now that there is a need, as shown by the pandemic, for example, that you need to have interoperability with clinical systems. You can't just keep people's, you've probably heard horror stories of people, they moving GP or moving house, and your big folder catches up with you 10 months later. So that sort of inefficiency will go away.
And do you think, similar to the financial services institutions, do you think there'll be a growth in healthcare technology startups as well that are going to be able to?
Yes.
Sort of...
A lot of consolidation will have to occur, but I see most people now accept that. I mean, okay, the reason I will say yes to that is because if you go to Google or the App Store and look for a health app, you'll see hundreds of thousands of them, and that tells me that people care about their health, and they're willing to use software or mobile devices to improve their health. And so let's just say there's 300.
That's more on I guess the person, like the patients, more so than the actual, I guess, industry itself. Which brings us nicely to the Noink platform. I'd love to find out a little bit more about it. Is that available now? Is it, or are you still?
Yes, it's I won't say it's a stealth program, but it has users. It's in trials, and we'd be delighted if you go to our website. We'd be delighted to let people try it.
Put a link down at the bottom for sure.
But yeah,
I'll download it. Yeah, please. But yeah, so tell me a little bit what the Noink platform is and why people should use it and what the people can gain from it.
Noink stands for no ink, so it's a digitization play. So as I said just a few minutes ago, was if you go look for a health app, there's hundreds of thousands of them, which tells us people care about their health. They want to use software or to improve their health. And the fact that so many means it hasn't been a success.
Right.
So what the Noink platform tries to do is we analyzed and thought about this a lot from our sort of engineering and banking and a lot of our experience was, why is this? And we found that most of the health and wellness apps, they work for a single user, they work for a single condition in a single language. And most people are not hermits.
Yeah.
They usually have 0 health conditions, and then suddenly they get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Right.
And the multilingual, the one language, means it's not a global product, or you're ignoring cohorts that may. London, for example, where we are, is a diverse population. So what we tried to do was build a system that is multi-condition. So you are not just one condition, you can have any condition you want. More importantly, it's multi-user. So that is, you think of family, which reflects the reality of care. So if you have a loved one that has a particular condition, but is so vulnerable that they were not going to use technology, you can use the app on their behalf to record their notes or whatever. So the people who don't have access to technology or don't want to use technology can still leverage it by having multi-user aspects. So I mean, the answer I would say to that is anyone with dementia, with serious dementia, it doesn't matter how good your dementia app is, it's not going to be used by a person with dementia. Whereas their children or grandchildren would be able to use it to help them. So the platform itself is about, it allows you to quantify or record your notes. If you're using paper, Noink can do it for you.
Can you record medication, like when you've given medication, take a medication, and do multiple users have the ability to go into the same profile or like portfolio of users? For instance, if you had a vulnerable family member you had to give medication to, and you got 2 people that could do that, you don't want to double medicate someone, so you can.
Everything is logged. Yeah, so it's a private sort of walled garden or circle of members that have certain rights to log. To record notes for certain people. So it reflects the reality of family care. So
it's really important. I think, when if something never happens and they suddenly, well, what's their blood type? them situations you always hear it in the movies. It's like, well, I don't even know my own blood type. Can you log like your family members' blood types and things like that?
It's what's known in the healthcare world as a personal health record, but we've taken it a step further to be you can diarize anything. symptoms, conditions, medication,
Good for allergies.
consultations, everything, and
yeah,
works in
diabetes.
many languages.
Yeah,
So
sounds
it's been
really
used, for example, if you have all this data and you're in a foreign country, you can switch the language and show it to a doctor in their own language.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. That's the one circumstance I'll have where I barely know my own personal data, let alone a family member or partner or whatnot.
You're in A&E in a foreign country.
Yeah.
Post pandemic.
And you're just trying. Yeah, you can just literally get the phone and app open. But it's great. So is it in the app stores? Is it, or is it purely mobile based?
It's mobile based. It's not actually a native app because of our own security paranoia. So nothing is stored on the phone because we treat it as medical data, which means you can accidentally flush your phone down the toilet. It doesn't matter. So it's my paranoia around security, because it's not financial data. It's more important. It's health data.
Definitely. And so if anyone was to just search Noink,
noink.me will find us. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, stuff. That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Liam. It's been a really interesting chat. And
thank you for having me.
That's all right. Thank you for your time. I'll speak to you soon.
Great.
Cheers, Liam. Bye bye.